gathered together. And before I introduce the Commissioner, I want to say on behalf of our 41,000 students in Lake County, thank you. Thank you to United Way of Lake and Sumter County. Thank you to all our community and business partners represented in this room. Your support of our students has such a major impact on our success as a community and as a school district. So on behalf of them, I'd like to thank you so much for what you do every day. You do and I particularly want to thank Sue Cordova, because Sue has been such a champion for our children, and I want to personally thank her because she has been so passionate, committed, and dedicated to education and educational success, student by student, and I just personally want to thank you. We love working with you. So thank you. It is such a pleasure and an honor for me to have the opportunity to introduce to you our Commissioner. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Bennett. For nearly 30 years, Dr. Tony Bennett has dedicated his life to educating students, and you'll clearly see that in his comments. He began his career in southern Indiana as a high school science teacher and basketball coach, quickly advancing to school administration while building a reputation as a leader with talent for school management, strategic planning, and effective budgeting. After serving as a district superintendent, Dr. Bennett was elected as Indiana's Superintendent of Public Instruction in 2009. As a state superintendent, he led Indiana through its most comprehensive, student-focused education reform initiative. Focused on greater accountability and freedom, Dr. Bennett created the nation's most expansive school voucher program and saw record-high graduation rates and participation in advanced placement courses and exams. I believe he believed in RUC2 ready. Dr. Bennett's leadership quickly earned him a national reputation among government and educational leaders. In 2010, the Indiana Chamber of Commerce named Dr. Bennett as Tony Government Leader of the Year, and in 2011, the Fordham Institute named him Education Reform Idol. Dr. Bennett's high expectations for students and commitment to involving community partners has also made him a key player in the national education reform efforts. He serves on the Board of Counsel for Chief State School Officers, the Governing Board for Partnership for the Assessment for Readiness for College and for Career, known as PARC, and is a founding member and current chair of Chiefs for Change. He received his doctorate degree in education and a superintendent's license from Spalding University. He earned a certificate in certification in secondary administration and supervision, a master's of science in secondary education, and a bachelor of science in secondary education from Indiana University Southeast. Dr. Bennett is a devoted father of 4. He resides in Tallahassee with his wife Tina and beloved dog Teddy. And on a personal note, Dr. Bennett has joined the state as our commissioner and is new to our state, and he has hit the ground running. We enjoy his passion for education. He is extremely approachable and transparent and very candid, and we just have appreciated his dialogue on what we're all here for, and that's high education for the students in Florida. Welcome, Dr. Bennett.
Thank you, Susan. It's great to be here with you, sharing today with you. I always kind of get a kick out of the introduction, and I'll share with you something that happened last week. My wife, for the first time, attended an event with me. It was a habit she got into of not attending when we were in Indiana, because she didn't necessarily like all the welcome we received. And so she was listening to the introduction, and they brought up our dog Teddy. And she said, "Why in the world do you have Teddy in the introduction?" I said, "Honey, he's my best friend." And she had this hurt look on her face. And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "He's my best friend. I thought I was your best friend." we'll just check. So the next day, I put her and Teddy in the car. I took them to the golf course. I played a round of golf. 4.5 hours later, I came back and I said, "Who's happy to see you?" And she's never asked again. I want to thank Susan. I have enjoyed being here in Florida immensely. Enjoyed our superintendents. Having been a high school principal, career tech ed director, and a superintendent, I'd say the toughest job in education is a high school principal. The toughest job in education. But I will tell you this, the most lonely job in education is superintendent. You have no friends. You answer to a board, and they're not sure you do anything right. You answer to a community, they're certain you don't do anything right. So Susan, I appreciate your leadership, appreciate what you're doing for your children here. I want to start my comments, and I'm going to try to be brief. To the good pastor, my daughter says to me the third B is be gone. I would like to share with you something to start my comments happening in 2009. It has truly been a career-changing moment for me. I had the opportunity to be the breakfast speaker, 7:30 in the morning, of the Future Business Leaders of America State Conference in Indianapolis. It's 2009, so you have to understand I was just elected as Indiana State Superintendent. That's what, and as Cheryl Toole can tell you, I just need to stop for a second, because I don't want to be remiss. You should be very proud of your representative, Marlene Toole. She is... I've served legislatures now in 2 states and have witnessed legislatures traveling around the country in numerous states. And I want to tell you, first of all, she runs about the best committee I've seen in the country, most efficient. She rules it pretty tough. But she has done remarkable things for Florida's children. Again, you should be very proud of her, and I thank her for her leadership. But you can tell when you're a newly elected official because you're the breakfast speaker at 7:30. So 2009 in March, I rolled in and I gave the Future Business Leaders of America my passionate, you got to get out and do your best. This is international competition. The kids from India and China are out to kick your tails. They're going to take seats in Notre Dame and Purdue and IU, and they're just out to get us, and we've got to have you at your best. Okay, I left, got my thank you note, and in the thank you note was an invitation to come back the next year, which I was somewhat shocked. So I get back in March of 2010, and I'm greeted at the door by a young man, and he says, "Dr. Bennett, do you remember me?" And the truth was I did not. But I had seen on that screen a scrolling video, and I recognized this young man was the president of the Future Business Leaders of America. And I said, "Well, yeah, you're the president of this outfit, right?" And he stuck his hand out and says, "Dr. Bennett, my name is William Sal. Can I give you a gift?" Now, in March of 2010, we've been very active in the education reform stuff in Indiana, and plowed a lot of ground. And I wanted to ask William, is your mom a teacher? Does the gift tick? If she baked cookies, will Ross taste test them for me? But he took me over to his seat, and he got in his briefcase, and he handed me a little red book. And the book today sits on my nightstand. I've read it 2 or 3 times. And the book has a shiny cover, red, and the title of the book is this: Fierce Urgency, Education and Future Global Competition Through the Eyes of a Young Chinese Immigrant. And the author is William Zhao. Okay? And inscribed on the front cover of the book, it has this: "To Dr. Bennett, you inspired me to write this book." And in the year between 2009 and 2010, William wrote and self-edited and published a book about education and international competition. And very early in his book, he makes, in my opinion, one of the most profound comments that I have ever heard about education. And William says this, and just a quick background on William. He grew up in Anshan, China, spent the first 10 years of his life in China. He moved to Vancouver, and then his parents moved to the middle of Indiana, a place called Kokomo, when he started high school. And William says this in his book. He says, education is like a big old chess game. And he says, I fear that my native country is playing chess to win. But I more fear that my current home country is playing chess not to lose. And he said, I know my native country and I know what's on their mind. And if we don't start playing chess to win, they're going to get us. 18-year-old kid. And he says, good enough isn't good enough anymore. So what we have settled for is not good enough anymore. And I think of William. We still correspond by email all the time. He's a Wells Scholar at IU. Great kid. Will undoubtedly be a success. But he very succinctly has captured why we have folks like Susan Moxley working so hard, and why I think it is so important that United Way is investing in education. Is because good enough isn't good enough. And we must have a fierce urgency about how we prepare our children for college and career. We must have a fierce urgency to make sure that Florida and the United States continue to be the national and international leaders in how we educate children, how we attract jobs, and how we grow an economy. We must do that. And we must never take our eyes off the fact that we can't play this game not to lose. And I want to talk to you about just a couple of ideas. And there are many in the education space, and then we'll take some questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer any question. Understand, I just came off 10 months of a political campaign. There's nothing you can ask that will offend me, and there's no way you can ask it that would offend me. But I just want to talk about a couple things. One of those things is drawing a great deal of debate. Madam Chair and I were talking about this very issue when I first sat down. Some of you may have heard about it. Superintendent lives it every day when she said, are you ready for college and career readiness? And that is Common Core state standards. It is an issue, as I was coming in today, where I read a great deal. I have debated this issue in virtually every corner of the country in support of Common Core. I want to be very clear about that. And it is an issue where some of my colleagues do not agree with me. And I want to be very clear with anyone sitting here in the audience that would say, I'm really not for that. And again, I'll take your questions about it, but I want to tell you why I think it is so vitally important to move us to William's vision of fierce urgency. And that is, in my experience as an educator, and I've been doing this since 1983, I have never witnessed anything in education, and we've had fads come and go. Never had anything that has affected education where we kept three things in mind to transform the way our children learn, our teachers teach, and the way we assess those two activities. Common Core will do those three things. It will transform the way children learn. It will transform the way teachers teach, so our children do learn, and it will transform the way we assess and analyze our students' progress. But it will do it doing three very important things that we've never done before. One, it will internationally benchmark our children. Never since I have been in education have we put our eyes on something that said, let's not just compare Lake County and Sumter County. Let's not just compare Lake County, Sumter County, and Osceola and Orange. Let's not just compare Florida and Indiana and Connecticut and Massachusetts and California. Let's compare ourselves to the rest of the world. And let's have a set of standards, not a curriculum. Let's have a set of standards that gives our kids a shot at being internationally benchmarked. So that's number one. Number two, it honors what I believe to be one of the most important things we have that makes this nation so great and honors our Constitution. This was a state-driven initiative. It's not a takeover by the federal government. I want to be very clear about that. I have some very strong opinions about what has happened during the rollout of Common Core, but I am here to tell you, as Commissioner of Indiana, now Commissioner of Florida, we in our Department of Education are responsible for this. We developed them, and we developed them by taking the best standards of all the states. Not all the standards of all the states, the best standards of all the states as a framework. So it's state-driven, internationally benchmarked, state-driven. And the third, for the first time in our history, we are now going back to honoring local control. The creativity of our teachers. How many of you have ever heard this phrase, we do too much teaching to the test? Ladies and gentlemen, in the next 3 to 5 years, your superintendent will be able to have a discussion with you, with her teachers, where they will not talk about teaching to the test. They'll be talking about making sure students are problem solvers and critical thinkers. They will be talking about a deep understanding of content, a deep, rich understanding about math and English language arts, with the ability to use teacher creativity to put social studies, science, music, PE back into our curriculum. And finally, the United States and Florida will stop leading the world in textbook thickness, and we will start leading the world again in critical analysis. So this initiative, internationally benchmarked, state-driven, honoring local control, is, in my opinion, the biggest issue our state faces. Because at the end of the day, Common Core ends with the idea that our students will be college and career ready. I have an 80-year-old dad on Friday, a veteran, Korean War veteran, so thank you very much, gentlemen, for your service. My dad and I were together not long ago and having a little debate. Dad says to me, "Tony, I don't understand why you're about all this math stuff." He says, "You know, I was a union electrician." I said, "I didn't take all that math." Of course, you know, I never miss a shot at my dad. And I said, "You know what that shows me, Dad?" He said, "What?" I said, "You're old." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You know, to go through the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Union apprenticeship program, you get the equivalent of an associate's degree. The math you take is the equivalent of a second year of college math. You just don't realize it. It's practical, applied algebra 2. And he thought about it for a minute and goes, "Okay, that makes sense." So when we talk about Common Core, we're not just talking about all kids going to college. We're talking about the common, essential skills for a well-educated population, a college-ready population, and a career workforce-ready population to drive an economy on high-skill, high-wage jobs. And we need your help. We need your help. We need you to dispel the myths. There are a lot of myths out there. And truthfully, there are a lot of truths out there to the other side. We need to have that very intelligent, reasonable discussion, and we need to continue to push our students in this direction. The second issue I want to talk about is mentoring. We know in education there is nothing more important other than the child's parents than an inspired and inspiring teacher. But let's go to how many children that don't have that nucleus of a family. Or maybe children don't have the opportunity to have parents who have the time to spend because they're fighting to make ends meet. I'll take stock in children here. There is tremendous, tremendous benefit to making sure our children have significant adults in their lives to help them make critical decisions. Virtually every state now has some type of opportunity scholarship where a child can take state money and go into post-secondary. I want you to think about a growing trend, and I think Florida is really helping us solve, and that is how much of that money is wasted. Sounds harsh. But far too often, we take disadvantaged children who have never had access to that sum of money, and we hand it to them without any guidance, any mentoring, and we say, here, go pick your way to college. When we use Take Stock, we help our children do that. So I ask you, besides pushing us with college and career readiness and Common Core, think about being a significant adult in the life of a child. Think about helping a child learn to read. Think about helping a child learn to think. And think about helping a child learn to grow so they can become that significant adult in the next generation. That's fierce urgency. That's fierce urgency. And we can talk about a number of other things, and I'm going to stop here, and I want to read you a quick poem that I actually read this morning, so that just tells you how well I prepared. I want to read you a poem by Charles Osgood of Sunday Morning fame. Now, you're going to have to excuse me for just a second while I open my iPad. This actually came to me from one of my former staff members in Indiana, and said, Tony, I thought of you when I read this. And it is very powerful, and it is actually called Good Enough, oddly enough. And I thought it was very appropriate with Williams' words. It's actually called Pretty Good by Charles Osgood. There once was a pretty good student who sat in a pretty good class and was taught by a pretty good teacher who always let pretty good pass. He wasn't terrific at reading. He wasn't a whiz-bang at math. For him, education was leading straight down a pretty good path. He didn't find school too exciting, but he wanted to do pretty well. And he did have trouble with writing, since nobody taught him to spell. When doing arithmetic problems, pretty good was regarded as fine. 5 and 5 needn't add up to 10, because a pretty good answer was 9. The pretty good class sat and was part of a pretty good school. And the student was not an exception. On the contrary, he was the rule. The pretty good school that he went to was there in a pretty good town, and nobody there seemed to notice he couldn't tell a verb from a noun. The pretty good student, in fact, was part of a pretty good mob, and the first time he knew what he lacked was when he went out to look for a pretty good job. It was then he sought a position. He discovered that life could be tough, and soon he had a suspicion that pretty good might not be good enough. The pretty good town in our story was part of a pretty good state, which had pretty good aspirations and prayed for a pretty good faith. There once was a pretty good nation, pretty proud of the greatness it had, which learned much too late, if you want to be great, pretty good is in fact pretty bad. Folks, that's fierce urgency. Our kids deserve better than pretty good. Our job is to make sure they have much better than pretty good. And our job is to demand that of them, hold them accountable for that, and hold ourselves accountable for that as we move into a period of education history where our state and our nation need to go back to the top of the world stage. So with that, I'll take any questions you may have. And just raise your hand if you want to yell it out. I can repeat it if we don't hear it. Yes, sir, in the middle.
Is there an example of a state that was struggling, that kind of took the
Well, first, Common Core is not totally rolled out. Many of your districts in this state are really implementing at the early grades now, and full implementation will occur through the next school year. But let me share with you something that I think is very important to your point. This is, I hope you take with a great sense of pride. Florida as a state, and I can say this, I've been in this state 4 months. Florida as a state sets the national pulse on how we educate children. Florida, if you want to have a national discussion on how education must change, we constantly across the country look at 2 states. It's Massachusetts and Florida. And so in the era of accountability, Florida's a leader. States all across the country have adopted Florida's A through F grading model of schools. States all across the country have found a renewed sense that 3rd grade literacy is important for an educated population. Students all across the country have taken many things that Florida has done in the last 10 to 15 years and are beginning to implement those with success. So I think what we are seeing is a movement in much of the things Florida has done, and I understand we have a long way to go here. This is not a perfect success story. But let's never forget where we started 15 to 20 years ago either. Yes, sir, in the back.
Dr. Bennett, is it true that Florida is ranked 42nd in pupil expenditure?
I'm sorry?
42nd?
I think that is correct. Yes, sir.
If that is correct, what do you propose to do about that?
Well, let me that's a good question. One of the things we really need to do is work with our legislature, because I will tell you, we can have this discussion, and I can take you on the road with me, and whether you are first in the United States in per pupil expenditure or 50th, it is a very complicated discussion to which there is no good answer. I'm going to tell you this, and this is probably not the answer you want to hear, but as Susan said, one of the things you'll learn about me is I'm pretty candid. It amazed me that while we were back in Indiana, in the toughest economic times in our state's history, we cut education funding pretty significantly, and every academic indicator that we measured went up. Every academic indicator. Graduation rates went up. You heard Susan talk about advanced placement. Success went up. Indiana was second, by the way, to Florida in advanced placement performance. And our students' performance on our state's assessments went up. Now, what that tells me is this. While you have to fund education well, and you have to fund it equitably, the most important thing we should be talking about in education funding is making sure that our fiscal decisions and our education policy decisions are connected. Are we funding what we want to get out of the system? Because many states believe that this idea of just per pupil funding, that sometimes can be considered a road to nowhere too. Because is per pupil funding the same in our toughest urban districts or our most disadvantaged rural districts as it is in our affluent suburban districts? And if you look at states that have complexity indices, they too complain about that. So I guess my answer to you is I'm not sure what the right answer is when it comes to per pupil funding. I think the most important thing we can do is invest in the results we want to get. And if the results are college and career readiness, we need to have a very direct policy discussion about how we drive funding to those issues. We have one that was handed in here. Many young parents feel ill-prepared to help their children with homework. What effort is available to assist parents with this? And do we prepare parents to mentor their own children? You know, I want to answer that second one first, because, you know, I am a grandfather of 3. And I dare to tell you that I've set a 27-year-old triplets, and one of them has one of my grandchildren, and my 24-year-old has the other 2 kids. And Tony's daughter is 2, and Lizzie's kids are 2 and 3. And I will tell you, I'm not sure either one of those kids are prepared to parent their own kids. And I don't mean that as a criticism. Because you know what? The world they grew up in, and the safety and the comfort of the Bennett's house, is not the society their children are growing up in. So I think what we have to do is go back to discussing what I believe are the most important things in our society. People can talk about the philosophy of this, and I hope I don't offend anyone. But let's just go back to the fact that our nation was built on Judeo-Christian values. And let's go back to the fact that whether this is a religious statement or not, there is probably not a greater piece of literature in American history than the Bible. And let's go back to the fact that if you combine the Bible with the founding documents and great conversations, and you combine the Bible, the founding documents and great conversations with things like Shakespeare and Huck Finn, and parents spend time with their children reading and talking about those things, that's good mentoring. That's teaching good citizens. So I'm not so sure that in our society, and I have a ongoing conversation with my good friend Bill Bennett about this all the time, and we're not related, and Bill's thankful for that. That if we really thought about making sure our society was equipping families to address society's ills, wouldn't it be really good just to start with those 4 documents? Let's just start with those. Let's talk about civics in the context of the great conversations and founding documents. Let's talk about ethics and morals in the context of the Bible. Let's talk about a love of literature. Let's talk about the unity of the family in those contexts. I think that's a way of doing this. I also want to say that thank goodness for folks like United Way for investing in the many things you invest in your communities to help families. I wish, as your commissioner, I could fly over every house in Florida, sprinkle pixie dust over the house, and have every child come from a 2-parent family that reads to their children every night and gives every child the opportunity to succeed at the highest level. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, we can't do that. We live in a very difficult society. And as your commissioner, you know what Susan and I are going to have to spend our time doing? We have to spend our time making sure that the schools we put our most disadvantaged children in, Madam Chair was telling me about the children from the forest, we have to make sure that those schools are the best possible answers to poverty. Because I believe in my heart, and you will never convince me otherwise, we can all stand up against me on this, and you won't change my mind, that solving education doesn't start with solving poverty. Solving poverty starts with solving education. It says over 47,000 adults and young adults have no high school diploma. Some need remedial help, and others have difficulty paying $50 for their GED program. Why are changes being made to increase the difficulty of the GED program and increase the cost? It appears decisions are being made to decrease the number of people participating in the GED program. It's a great question, because I'm going to roll back the clock to 1979 when this young guy named Tony Bennett walked across the stage at Providence High School in Clarksville, Indiana. Had I not walked across the stage in 1979 and I had chosen to get a GED in 1979, I had the option of joining the United States military. Today, that does not get you in our military. I want you to think about that. This idea of increasing expectations for children, for increasing expectations for a skilled workforce, is a result of increased demand in the workforce. I maintain that putting more students in remedial classes is the worst thing we can do. First of all, there is very little question that more money spent by families on remedial courses and more time in college on remedial courses has a direct inverse relationship to college completion. Worked for a wonderful governor, as I do today. Mitch Daniels in Indiana one time stood up and told a whole bunch of people he saw remedial courses as a breach of contract. He says, we have a holy covenant in this K-12 education. We ought to make sure kids go to college ready for college work. But I also want to focus on that idea of the GED, because I still want to emphasize to you that the rigor being sought today to increase the GED should be equivalent to a high school diploma. And if our goal in giving a high school diploma is college and career-ready children, our goal for GED recipients should be college and career-ready GED recipients so they can drive the economy. And that's really the reason. It is not to limit high school success. It is to increase post-secondary opportunities after high school. I think we have time for another one. We have time for one more. Yes, sir.
When I was growing up in the mid-50s, or about that, you're about, you're 20 years older, or younger rather. Society was built where education was foremost. When I was growing up in the neighborhood, you didn't miss going to school. Your education was premised on what you watched on TV. It had to be educational. I remember this from my family. And so on and so forth. So you got this society at that time that was set up as a baseline for strong education. Today it's not that way. Today it's mostly entertainment, Disney World, whatever. So my question then is, to really start education, it's almost important to have the pre-K schedule going full blast. And so my question is, what are we doing in that area? Have we expanded it? How many students do we have? Where are they located? So on and so forth.
Well, let me respond to a second to your first point. Again, growing up in the 60s and the 70s, I would suggest to you that there is very little question society is much more complex today than it was when we were all growing up. That said, I look at my home state, my native state of Indiana, a manufacturing state. I look at what has happened to the erosion of many of the communities in the heart of that state, because many people there are probably like many people here. You could walk out of high school and get a really good manufacturing job in Indiana, most likely one of the auto plants in the middle of the state. And guess what happened in the late 70s? They started going away. And now the education of our children requires a more sophisticated skill set. The problem to me, in context to what you said, is really more of the fact that now education has to compete with those complexities. Back then, education didn't compete with the societal complexities that we see today. My after-school entertainment was going out in the back at a park and playing basketball. That's what everybody in Indiana did. That's not the case today. And there are far too many bad distractions for children that maybe I didn't have and you didn't have. And I think what is so important for us is to make sure we invest in things like career and tech ed, to make sure we have programs that engage students so they don't drop out and fall prey to that short-term gratitude. And I think we have to do that. Now, to your second point, there is no question. We have, especially in disadvantaged communities, we have kids starting school far too far behind. And there is no greater equalizer than making sure those children have preschool education, even early childhood education, that provides them a leg up or maybe an even start with their suburban colleagues. And we are seeing an increased number of that, but there's also an increased need. I mean, the economy has not been good. And we have far more kids in our system today in need than maybe we had when we were growing up. So I will tell you that part of the Child and Family Workforce Cabinet, David Lawrence, former publisher of the Miami Herald, and I are heading a work group on this very issue. Because to Superintendent Moxley's point, we want kids to end up college and career ready at the end of the day, right? Well, if you start with that and you map backwards, you're eventually going to get to preschool. And how do we use preschool to get to college and career ready? How do we put all that on the same continuum so that all children, regardless of their race, regardless of how much money their parents have in their pockets, all kids have the opportunity to reach college and career ready? So you are seeing a renewed sense of interest. I was speaking to the Madam Chair, and she said, when we sat down, I said, what are you doing now that the session's over? She said, I'm really thinking about how we give our early learners a leg up, and how we take those programs and make those programs work for our communities. So I'm thrilled Florida continues to lead on that. I am ashamed to tell you, I came from a state that did not invest in anything beyond full-day kindergarten. And I am thrilled to be in a state that understands the importance of giving our early learners a leg up. And I think you're going to see more and more and more discussion about that, so we do give students the opportunity to produce more college and career-ready children. And we have an opportunity here in Lake and Sumter counties to use education as the greatest economic development driver we have. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time.